You might wake up in Canada to the news that Trump imposes new tariffs on Canadian lumber, cabinets, and furniture. A lot of people have déjà vu, an old-fashioned trade war. Canadians remember this war all too well because timber has been the focus of US-Canada trade disputes for decades. But this time, the scope is wider. We're talking about more than just raw wood. We're talking about finished goods like kitchen cabinets, home furnishings, and other everyday objects. What will Canada do now? It's the most important question. Will Prime Minister Trudeau and his government be able to stop this? Will this have a negative effect on Canadian businesses, or worsen relations between the two countries that share the world's longest undefended border? Today, we'll look at every facet of this topic, from its history and politics to its impact on people and potential future developments. First, let's talk about the news. President Donald Trump claimed that the purpose of the higher tariffs was to protect American jobs and stop unfair Canadian competition. He asserted that Canadian furniture and lumber companies are undercutting American companies by selling their goods at lower prices in the US. Under the new rules, Canadian lumber may be subject to up to 20% tariffs, and imported cabinets and furniture may be subject to 15% to 25% tariffs, depending on the item. On paper, it looks like a step in the right direction for the economy. In essence, tariffs are taxes. They make it more expensive for Americans to buy Canadian goods. When this happens, businesses lose money, employees, and sales. To understand the importance of this, you must know how important lumber and furniture exports are to Canada. Lumber is one of Canada's oldest and most thriving industries. Whole towns in British Columbia, Alberta, and Quebec make their living primarily from sawmills and forestry. People have been working in the forests for generations, so these communities are more than just places to do business. Every year, Canada exports about $8 billion worth of softwood lumber to the US. Another $4 billion comes from furniture. As a result, implementing tariffs requires more than just spreadsheet data. Thousands of people, from Ontario furniture makers to Prince George sawmill owners, are suddenly confronted with an uncertain future. Why this keeps happening may be a mystery to Canadians. For more than 40 years, the US and Canada have been at odds over wood. No one can score the winning goal in the endless hockey game known as the softwood lumber dispute. Canadian lumber is unfairly cheap, according to Americans, because Canadian governments manage forests differently. Canadian businesses pay provincial governments stumpage fees in lieu of market prices for timber, which are frequently less than what individual US landowners want. That appears to be an unjust subsidy to Americans. Naturally, Canadians have a different perspective. They contend that their system is just different and not unjust. And the battle rages on. Trump's action is noteworthy, though, because raw lumber is no longer the sole contributing factor. Lower down the supply chain, Canadian companies are being impacted by the US's taxation of finished goods like cabinets and furniture. That's equivalent to saying, we want to stop not just your logs, but also your tables, chairs, and cabinets. As the battleground grows, Canada is under more pressure to react. What would Canada do then? Let's divide it into three potential approaches. First, fight it in court. Canada has two choices. It can challenge the US in international trade tribunals such as the World Trade Organization, or it can follow the procedures in the USMCA, the trade agreement that took the place of NAFTA. With differing degrees of success, Canada has tried this before. The issue is that court cases can drag on for years. The tariffs remain in effect in the interim. Consequently, Canadian businesses suffer while they await a decision. The second choice is to use counter-tariffs in retaliation. In 2018, Canada responded to Trump's steel and aluminum tariffs in this way. In response, Trudeau imposed tariffs on American products such as orange juice, ketchup, and whiskey. Retaliation and targeting businesses in politically vulnerable US states where Trump's supporters would be particularly hurt were part of the plan. Could Canada experience this again? Of course. Tariffs on furnishings, agricultural products, and even American-made goods may be imposed in exchange. However, there is always a chance of reprisal when escalation occurs. Trade wars spiral like that. Bargaining is the third option. US and Canadian officials might attempt to negotiate a deal behind closed doors, potentially agreeing on exclusions, quotas, or special rules for specific products. But talks with Trump are notoriously erratic. Sometimes he criticizes Canada, and other times he lashes out. Who knows what will happen? As politicians and diplomats weigh their options, the general public is already feeling anxious. Think about Canadian furniture manufacturers. Think about a small Ontario kitchen cabinet factory that sells half of its products to customers in Michigan and Ohio. In the United States, the price of these cabinets went up by 20% in a single day. Who's going to buy them now? Maybe there won't be any more orders. The company may terminate employees. After operating for more than 50 years, a family-run business may choose to shut down. That is the human side of tariffs that the media hardly ever covers. American consumers should not be disregarded. In addition to hurting Canadian producers, tariffs increase American prices. If Canadian lumber is more expensive, American home builders will pay more for it. As a result, new homes cost more. If Canadian furniture is more expensive, American households that purchase from stores like Home Depot or IKEA will have to pay more. Tariffs are commonly promoted as a way to protect jobs, but in reality, they usually act as an unstated tax on consumers. Let's stand back and look at the big picture. Why is Trump behaving this way now? Some analysts call it political theater. Trade disputes with Canada appeal to some American voters, especially in lumber-producing states like Maine and Oregon, where mills have long suffered. By concentrating on Canada, Trump might assert, "I'm standing up for American workers." This message is pertinent during an election year. It is part of Trump's broader economic nationalist agenda, according to some. He has long believed that the United States is being cheated by its trading partners, whether they are in Canada, Mexico, or China. He sees tariffs as a way to restore fairness, even though the data shows that they often backfire. Now, Canadians are used to American pressure. Trade disputes are now frequent in sectors like softwood lumber, dairy products, and steel. It feels different, though, because of the timing of this most recent change. Canada's economy is already having difficulties. Canadian families are under pressure due to rising interest rates, inflation, and housing affordability issues. Furthermore, a trade war may push certain industries to their breaking point. What is the Canadian government's practical response? Preliminary signs suggest a mix of firm warnings and tactful diplomacy. Prime Minister Trudeau stated that Canada will defend its workers and its industries with all available tools. Trade Minister Mary Neng hinted that countermeasures are on the table. Canadian authorities are trying to rally support for the United States from a variety of sources, including governors, trade groups, and even American consumers who are against price hikes. The goal is to put more internal pressure on the US to lower or remove the tariffs. But let's be honest, people in Canada are annoyed. For many, it feels like an endless circle. There are disagreements over lumber, agreements are made, and then the disagreements come up again. Now that cabinets and furniture are on the list, the discontent only grows. Additionally, if this continues, businesses might start searching elsewhere. Some Canadian companies are already considering exporting to Europe and Asia in an attempt to reduce their reliance on the US market. So what are we left with? One could argue that Trump's tariffs are merely a negotiating tactic to pressure Canada into negotiating a new deal. They could, however, also mark the start of yet another drawn-out and painful stage in the history of the trade dispute between the US and Canada. For Canadians, the stakes are high. One of the unintended consequences for Americans may be price increases. For both countries, the partnership is once again being tested. In the end, this is not merely a story about lumber and furniture. It concerns neighborly trust and how two of the world's closest allies resolve their conflicts. Do they manage to come to an agreement, or do they never stop fighting? Canada will undoubtedly respond. The only question is whether patience, retaliation, or a deal will be used. That is the current drama, and decisions made in the coming weeks could have a long-term impact on North America's economic course. If you found this content insightful and want to stay updated on the latest developments in international trade and economic policies, consider liking and subscribing. Your support helps us continue to deliver in-depth analysis and coverage of the stories that matter most. By subscribing, you'll be the first to know about new updates, expert interviews, and detailed breakdowns of global events. Join our community and never miss an important discussion on the changing world economy.